What if betrayal didn't come from an enemy, but from someone who once stood right beside you? What if the moment everything fell apart began with something as simple and as painful as a kiss? And what if, in the face of injustice and chaos, Jesus chose not to resist, even when he had every power to do so? The night had grown darker in the Garden of Gethsemane. The stillness that once held the sound of prayer was now shifting into something heavier, something unavoidable. Jesus had just finished praying. His words still lingered in the air, words of surrender, words of trust, words that sealed his path forward. The disciples were awake now, but not because they had remained faithful in watchfulness. They were awake because something was coming. And then it appeared. A crowd. Not a small group, not a quiet arrival, but a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent by the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Religious leaders, people who claimed to protect truth, now arriving with weapons in the dark. And at the front of that crowd was Judas, one of the 12, one of the closest, one who had walked the same roads, heard the same teachings, witnessed the same miracles, now leading the way. He had already made a plan. The one I kiss is the man, he had told them. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. A kiss, something meant to show affection, respect, connection, now turned into a signal of betrayal. As Judas approached, there was no hesitation. He stepped forward, looked at Jesus and said, "Rabbi," and then he kissed him. In that moment, everything collided. Love and betrayal, trust and deception, closeness and separation. And Jesus responded with words that cut deeper than any weapon. Do what you came for. No anger, no resistance, just truth. Then the crowd moved in. Hands reached out, grabbing, seizing, taking control of the moment. And just like that, Jesus was arrested. The one who had calmed storms now stood silent. The one who had healed the sick now allowed himself to be taken. The one who had all authority chose not to use it. But not everyone stayed calm. One of those standing nearby reacted. A sword was drawn, a quick, desperate attempt to fight back. The servant of the high priest was struck, his ear cut off. It was chaos, fear and instinct taking over. Because when everything falls apart, our first reaction is often to fight, to protect, to control. But Jesus stopped it. "Am I leading a rebellion," he said, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me?" There was something almost exposing in his words. Every day he had been with them, teaching openly in the temple, in the light, in public, and they did nothing. But now, in the dark, with weapons, they came for him. Not because they didn't know where he was, but because they feared the truth he carried. This has happened so that the scriptures might be fulfilled. Even in the middle of betrayal, even in the middle of injustice, Jesus saw purpose. Not chaos, not randomness, but fulfillment. Something bigger than the moment. Something written long before that night. And then something heartbreaking happened. The disciples fled, all of them. The ones who had promised loyalty. The ones who said they would never fall away. The ones who stood with him just hours before. They ran. Fear took over. Self-preservation replaced devotion. And suddenly, Jesus stood alone, completely alone. There's a silence in that image that speaks louder than words. No crowd of supporters, no disciples by his side, no defense, just him and those who came to take him away. But the story adds one more detail. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment had been following Jesus. Curious, close enough to see what was happening, but not fully committed. When they tried to seize him, he fled too, leaving the garment behind, running away naked into the night. It's a strange detail, easy to overlook, but powerful, because it shows something real. That when fear rises, even those who are curious, who are near, who are watching, can still run, can still let go of everything just to escape. This wasn't just the arrest of Jesus, it was the unraveling of human strength, betrayal from within, fear from those closest, violence from those trying to control, and silence from the one who could have changed everything, but chose not to. Why? Because this wasn't about power, it was about purpose. Jesus wasn't caught off guard, he wasn't overpowered, he wasn't defeated, he surrendered. There's a difference, being taken and choosing to go. And that difference changes everything. Because it means this moment was not the end of control, it was the fulfillment of it. Jesus knew from the beginning that this path would lead here, to betrayal, to arrest, to suffering. And still, he walked into it. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. That kind of love is hard to understand because it doesn't fight back. It doesn't demand justice in the moment. It doesn't protect itself. It gives, even when it hurts, even when it costs everything. And maybe that's what makes this story so personal, because it forces us to look at ourselves, to ask questions we don't always want to ask. Where do we stand in this moment? Are we like Judas, trading something sacred for something temporary? Are we like the disciples, running when things get hard? Are we like the one who fights, trying to fix things in our own strength? Or are we willing to trust, even when it looks like everything is falling apart? Because the truth is, we all see ourselves in different parts of this story, at different times, in different ways. But the focus always returns to Jesus. Calm, steady, unshaken. Even as everything around him breaks, he doesn't lose his purpose. He doesn't lose his identity. He doesn't lose his trust in the Father. And that's the anchor. Because life brings moments like this, moments where things don't make sense, where betrayal happens, where people walk away, where fear rises, where control slips through our hands, and in those moments we have a choice. Do we panic? Do we run? Do we fight in our own strength? Or do we trust like he did? Not blindly, not passively, but with a deep-rooted understanding that even in the darkest moments, God is still at work. That even when things feel out of control, there is still purpose unfolding. Jesus didn't resist the arrest because he knew what was coming after. He knew the cross was not the end. He knew the story didn't stop there. And that's what gives this moment meaning. Because without the arrest, there is no sacrifice. Without the surrender, there is no redemption. Without the darkness, there is no resurrection. So this moment, this painful, chaotic, unjust moment, is not meaningless. It's necessary. And that doesn't make it easy. But it makes it powerful, because it shows us a different kind of strength. Not the strength to fight back, but the strength to trust forward, to keep walking, to keep believing, even when everything says stop, even when everything says run. Jesus stayed, and because he stayed, everything changed. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to your heart, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.